many of you have heard that passage that Laura just read before, just a few minutes ago? Maybe you've heard that exactly as is or some variation of it. It's a very well-known Bible text from a book called Ecclesiastes, which translates to the preacher. It was written by King Solomon. And it's filled with this language that kind of shocks you when you start reading it. He says, meaningless, meaningless. Everything is utterly meaningless. We're all just a bunch of animals caught in loops trying to find meaning, but there is nothing new under the sun. And it sounds kind of melancholy, right? Not too hopeful. And to be honest with you this morning about myself, the words in this passage are, for the most part, my default inner narrative in everyday life. If I don't catch myself, I have to work at being hopeful. I have to work at being optimistic. Those things are in there somewhere, buried deep within me, but they're not my first inclination. I didn't choose to be a cynic. I was just born that way. And I think for most people, if Jesus were to just suddenly appear out of the ether in front of them, I think a lot of people would fall at his feet, just wrapped in wonder, speechless at how marvelous he is. But not me. If Jesus appeared to me, the first thing I would say, standing there with arms crossed, would probably be something like, "My Lord and my God, you need to trim your beard. It's disgusting." Followed by, "And you have dust on your sandals, Jesus." Followed by, "Oh, and by the way, since you're here, I've always wanted to ask you this. Why is the world so awful? That's still your department, right? Why is this so awful here? I'm cynical. That's how I am. I see the glass half empty." And at first glance, I read this passage and I think to myself, amen, thank God, finally someone in the Bible decided to get honest about how things really are. The problem is this, though. I also have this other side of me. I also have another part of me, even if it's only there in bits and shreds. There's still this part of me deep in there somewhere that hopes, that believes, that has a hunch that as sad as it gets, joy cometh in the morning. So what do I do with these things? If you're at all like me here this morning, a person who struggles, has this tug of war going on within them between grouchiness and goodness, where does one find goodness here in this melancholy passage? If we look at it, it is there, but it takes some effort to use that hopeful side of us to see it. And this is where I'd like us to spend our time on this passage today. Again, the passage says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Now, if I look at this passage honestly, without reading my preconditioning into it, my pre-programming into it, I see three sections here unfolding before me. Number one, I see it starting with the idea of despair. The writer begins by lamenting the meaningless of everything that we experience as human beings, and he pulls no punches. There is no meaning to any of this, he says. Life is meaningless. Existence is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That's the mindset the writer begins with. And then number two, he asks a question. After despairing about human existence, and an important question, he asks, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? You ever wondered what the answer to that question is in your own life? Maybe not in those exact words, but thematically the same at least. I think about that all the time. You get out of bed in the morning and just, you look in the mirror, oh. You look at your checking account, oh. You try to climb a set of stairs and then you go, is there an elevator in here? What do I gain from any of this? Life takes so much energy, so much work, so much endurance. And then I die. What's the point? This is the writer's honest question. And I resonate with that. Then lastly, it's like the writer comes to this realization. He says, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Now, like I said about these, I don't want to speak for you. There are two warring factions within me, and maybe that happens to some degree in you as well. But there are these two sides of us, and how they impact our way of life, the way we look at the world, the way we respond to the stimuli in it. That being what it is, how do we interpret all of this? I think if we don't read these sections as they clearly are, if we just take that pessimistic side of us and that cynical side of us, if we just take apathy to this passage and just rush through it and mash it all together, the passage reads as nothing more than a grand treatise on the frailty and frustration and failure of the human experience. But maybe it's not. And this other side of me that hopes and loves and dreams demands that I explore that. Maybe the writer here is also acknowledging within themselves this struggle between grouchiness and goodness and horror and hope, and siding with hope in the end. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. Because there's nothing new under the sun. What if what this is really saying is something more like, don't despair about all of this. Even though on the surface, at first glance, this all seems meaningless, there will never be a day where the ground isn't beneath your feet and the sun doesn't rise again. This is how God works, and that's never going to change. God stays the same, always. Or even simpler, what if this is just saying something like, God is the ground under us, and God is the light ahead of us, and that's not new. It was, it is to come. What if there's hope in this for us? I have a good friend who 2 years ago struck this giant book deal with Random House. I mean, Random House is one of the biggest publishers in the world. And if you know anything about writing and publishing, you know that there is a lot of work that happens between the initial publishing offer and the actual publishing of the book. It can take years. They make you work for it. Anyway, the writing has been no less difficult for my friend. The first year, she wrote the book from front to back and turned it in, and they didn't like it. They asked for a complete rewrite. So the second year, she did a complete rewrite and turned that in, and they didn't like that either, and they asked her to write it again. And now in the third year, she's rewriting the book again and has been submitting it to them in chunks, and they're head over heels in love with it. And I was asking her about this, I was just interested. I asked her what changed about the book for her and why she thought they liked it so much this time around but didn't like it the other 2 times. And this is how she responded. Listen to this. She said, I think I needed to write it twice and have somebody tell me that it wasn't good so that I could get past writing to make the readers and the publisher happy. This time around, I'm not writing with any of those things in mind, and I'm just writing what I want and what's honest. And I guess that's why it's good this time. And I think the lesson in this passage is something akin to that. Life is a series of rewrites. They are laborious, and we don't see meaning in them while they're happening. It hurts. We're buried in a mountain of competing narratives and endless loops, trying to arrange them all perfectly so that our life tells a story that makes us and everyone else happy. And that's why it feels meaningless. That's why it feels pointless. But really, there is no avoiding this. Things have to be done and done again and done again. That is life. But if in hindsight we look back over all of it, we might see that during all of those rewrites, we always had ground under our feet, and the sun always kept rising again. These constants in our lives were and are God's doing and God's providence as we claw and climb and stumble our way toward meaning. And guess what? There's nothing you can do about it. You can't hasten it. You can't figure it out. You can't build a formula. It doesn't fit into charts and graphs. The math of it will never make any sense. We just keep breathing, and we keep putting one foot in front of the other. We just keep going. We just keep working. Someday we will look back and see something and go, I see what was going on there. But we won't know when that is, and we certainly won't see it ahead of time. There's nothing new under the sun. And that is the hope in this. God will do for us as he does for all, saints and sinners alike. God never changes. Jesus Christ said this in the Gospel of Matthew in the 5th chapter. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Listen to this. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God is the ground under us and the light ahead of us. And not just some of us, all of us, whether you think you're deserving of it or not. Free will gives us a lot of leeway, but we don't have a choice in this. The breath you just took, without even knowing it, is God alive in you. How might your life start to feel? What might your life start to look like if you took this approach to the apparent meaninglessness of it? What would it do to your relationships? Would it make you patient with people in your life that are always frustrating you by how they just keep repeating the same thing over and over again? Would it cause us to stop saying things like, oh, just stop it. Why can't you just stop it? Maybe they're in the middle of the greatest lesson of their life, and you're getting in the way. Would we be gentler with ourselves, with where we want to be in our careers, or where we think we need to be in our careers, where we think we need to be monetarily, emotionally, spiritually? Would we be gentler with ourselves if we stopped asking, why does the same thing keep happening over and over again? This is meaningless. There's no point. You could be in the middle of the greatest lesson of your life. You just have to go through it. Might living and believing this way cause you to live lighter, with your hands open instead of clenched with white knuckles? Might it relieve some of the tension in your shoulders and the anxiety in your mind? What if God is with you, even though it seems like there's no point? Let's pray.